Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, wherever you're located. Welcome to the September 2021 edition of the ProjectWise Administrator Coffee Corner. Just to review, my name's Bill DiGregorio. I'm the Director of Platform Services for Bentley. I'll be the host for today. Very excited to have as a presenter Dave Cumming, a ProjectWise consultant from our Americas region. Dave is here to talk to us about Civil 3 integration with ProjectWise, which kind of in line with what we're doing with the managed workspaces. This is going to be in two parts. So part one, which is obviously today, Dave's going to go through the paces on setting up your environment for a successful Civil 3D project. And we'll get to Dave in a second. Just a couple of things before we go. As I've been promoting this year and will continue to do so at least through the end of the year, is G2, which is a peer-to-peer review site. Essentially, it's for information reviews in a business software perspective that aggregate all of the surveys and give us a score, which is posted on the grid. Bentley's asking all of our users to put in a survey. I'm asking all of our ProjectWise users to go in and put in a survey if they don't mind. The one thing that's nice about this is with this platform, if you leave a survey, G2 is going to donate $10 for Water for People. So it's actually a good cause, and you're giving us some feedback. That feedback could be anything. Could be this presentation, Coffee Corners in general, other thoughts about ProjectWise. This particular page is specific for ProjectWise. So again, if you have 5 minutes, that'd be great if you could go out and do that. I'll throw the link in the chat window once we get going. So would appreciate it.
Welcome, everybody. Like Bill said, this is part one, session one of a two-part series on ProjectWise Integrated Civil 3D. And I'm Dave Cumming. I'm a ProjectWise consultant with Bentley's User Success Services Group in the Americas. I'm based out of Atlanta. Today, we're going to focus on topics that ProjectWise administrators can do to influence a successful environment for their Civil 3D users and the experience that they have. Next month, in the second session, we're going to look at things from the Civil 3D SME perspective, and that course is kind of probably geared more toward the Civil 3D leads. And we're going to really talk about how to best leverage the environment that the admin set up and make sure that things are efficient, working really well, and that everything is set up for a healthy Civil 3D project and user experience. So for today, I'm going to assume that everybody knows their way around ProjectWise Administrator, but that you might not be so familiar with Autodesk's Civil 3D application. So we're going to start right with some basic vocabulary and make sure that we're all on the same page regarding some of the terms that I throw out there. And next month, I'll flip that around and we'll kind of assume everybody, or many of you, will have Civil 3D experience, but we won't take for granted that everybody's a ProjectWise expert. So we're going to focus a little bit at the beginning on some of the basic mechanics and probably do a little overlap so we're all using the same terms again. I really do encourage ProjectWise admins to watch both sessions. There's often, depending on how your organization is set up, there's often a lot of handover between the Civil 3D experts and ProjectWise admins, and it's a good opportunity to really kind of see things from both sides. So on the agenda today, I've got it broken up into three sections. So we're going to talk a little bit about background, like I said, some vocabulary, establish some ground rules, and I want to show you a little bit about what I love about ProjectWise and what it brings to Civil 3D experience. We're going to talk about configuration. This is sort of the must-see part. With a successful ProjectWise integrated Civil 3D implementation does come a few things that you need to worry about, and we are going to look at those. And then we get into data management. We're going to talk about the structure, how Civil 3D data is meant to be structured from an Autodesk perspective. We're going to look at some folder recommendations that will cater to that structure. And then at the end of things, I'm going to show you, consider this custom attributes more of a tips and tricks session. This is something that really works well for me and I find a lot of value in, so I want to pass that on to you. So on background, like I said, we're going to talk about some of the terms, we're going to lay down the ground rules, and we're going to talk about some features and benefits of ProjectWise. So when it comes to Civil 3D, everything is based on a data shortcut, right? That's kind of the central idea. And if you haven't heard of this, a data shortcut is a model. It's inside of a DWG file, and it's shareable. So it's 3D content with data attached to it. It can be a surface, an alignment, pipe network, various other things. It's organized in a project folder, right? So I'm showing you the natural structure here, the way that Civil 3D structures this data. And everything at the system generated shortcuts folder and below, these are where your data shortcuts live. And those are XML files. The data shortcut project is basically what we're moving back and forth between ProjectWise and the user's local working directory. And the working folder I'm pointing out here is not what you're used to seeing what we call the working directory for ProjectWise. Civil 3D has a term that it calls the working folder, which it packages all of this stuff in. To kind of lay it out there, the system generates this folder 2 levels below the working folder, and that's how it all comes together. Now, data shortcuts are actually created and shared from a source drawing and used by a consumer drawing. So you can kind of relate to that in how an XREF works, right? Master drawing and the XREF drawing, but it is different. You can have several different data shortcuts in a source drawing and pull out the ones you need into a consumer drawing. We refer to these as level 1 and level 2 because Autodesk refers to them that way. Level 3 drawings are the production drawings. So typically the way that this stuff all comes together is that a source drawing will share a data shortcut through its project folder. A consumer drawing will reference that data shortcut, and a production drawing is kind of the thing that points back at the level 2 drawing and shows in a way that's scalable and maybe a title block and a border wrapped around it. That's how it all comes together. So the ProjectWise terms, and there's really only one new one that you need to know, and that is the Civil DS Proj file. So what that is, everything from this level right here and below, wrapped up, zipped up, and given one file extension. So it's singular object in ProjectWise, and that allows it to be mobile. It can be checked out, checked in, updated. There's an audit trail attached to it. And you can see here that in ProjectWise, the document actually has a logical set. So when you see this icon in ProjectWise, you know that means that it has dependencies. And a Civil DS project file does have dependencies, and they are its source drawings, so level 1 models. Working directory, again, reason we want to point it out is because it's separate from Civil 3D's working folder. So Civil 3D has a working folder, ProjectWise working directory, and you all know that's where business happens locally. Everything that you're copying out or checking out goes to the working directory, and that's where we're actually working. So to talk about some ground rules, there's just 3 of them. The first one is, generally speaking, I would say in better than 90% of the cases, everyone that works directly with a data shortcut project is going to need to have rewrite access to it. There are, and when I say work directly, I mean you're either creating data shortcuts or you're working in those level 2 drawings where you might need to repair one. Level 3 drawings, if you're set up to basically only XREF the level 2s, you might not need access to the data shortcut project, but everybody that works directly with those data shortcuts is going to need to have that access. You can restrict write access from the source drawings in level 1, but it's important that they be read-only, generally speaking. In level 1 and level 2, they need to remain read-only so that the files that are looking to get updates actually receive them. Now, these 2 things kind of start speaking to folder structure, right? In order to really be able to be flexible with what you're assigning access control to, it works best if you're doing that at a folder level rather than the document level. So think about keeping these things in their own folder locations. The last ground rule, and probably, always the most important thing that we need to advise users of is never work outside of the ProjectWise integration. And it includes going through the back channel and opening files directly from those DMS folders. And that's especially true when you're working with files that have relationships with each other. So XREF, definitely. If you attach an XREF behind the integration, ProjectWise doesn't know about it. It doesn't add it to the logical set. That gets a lot more complicated when we talk about data shortcuts and establishing relationships between drawings using the data shortcut project without ProjectWise integration. It can really cause a lot of problems in a civil 3D project if this starts happening. So, encourage and enforce this policy with the user base. So let's talk about why ProjectWise. Obviously, it goes without saying, more and more every year, we need a common data environment to work in. We're working, especially the last year and a half, we're all working from different homes, different offices. Sometimes we're working from different regions of the country or the globe. So ProjectWise provides that. But then there's the little things, which are not so little. So the audit trail, real simple, right? And I do a lot of troubleshooting work. I get called in to help people kind of fix civil 3D projects a lot. I use the audit trail all the time. Who did what when? If we can find where the root cause of something is, we know maybe to the extent of which, it kind of snowballs out into the project. We know who to go to kind of do some coaching. Audit trail is very valuable. Scan for references and link sets. For those of you who have used this tool, you know how valuable it is. And for those of you who haven't, it's a tool that will basically go in and analyze master files and say, what are you XREFing? And you point it at where it can find those XREFs, and it resolves all the relationships for you. The big thing to know, there's two things to know here. One, this is a powerful tool, so be careful with how you use it, because if you do have duplicates, and this is number two, it's going to use the first one it finds. So duplicate files should probably have their own little folder structure, right? So that if you do run the ref scan and rely on this tool, you're not accidentally hitting those files. Dependency viewer, picture's worth 1,000 words. Understanding the relationship between these files can just be really difficult if you don't have a map like this. And I want to point out, all of the arrows are going in one direction here. When you've got arrowheads on both sides of this coin, if your block filter is set up to look at not only showing references, but also referenced by, it indicates a circular reference. And for Civil 3, that can, for anything really, that can kind of throw you into a loop that'll really affect your file open times. I use the set show references, just simply you right click on something, go down to the set menu and show references, see what are the files in the logical set. Basically, are there any surprises there? Is there anything missing? And for those of you who are using a data source that's set to lock your documents to a particular version of your reference file, there's a tool to go in and manage that. And the reason I want to point that out here is because some people are not aware that the Civil DS Proj file or your data shortcut project is subject to this. So if your data source is set up to lock to the reference version, you do need to go in there and advance the documents in the logical set so that the Civil DS Proj file is always pointing at the active version or the active tip file. DS folder repair, this is a tool that we run from within the Civil 3D application from the command line and functions similarly to what the scan for references tool, how that works. What it does is it focuses on the data shortcut, though, and it will go through and repair any broken references that might be in the consumer drawings or the level 2 drawings. And finally, the ProjectWise Data Shortcut Project Editor, which is a standalone application. I'm going to actually show it to you on a slide here in a second. I wanted to point out, though, before I advance this one, that everything that's underlined here is basically a link, right? And I can make this PowerPoint available to everyone, too. So most of these will point back to docs.bentley.com, and you can find out more information there about any of these tools. But the Data Shortcut Project Editor, there's not a lot written on it, and I'd like to do something about that possibly later this year or early next year. But it is a standalone application. Remember, back to the ground rules, we need the data shortcut project itself need to remain writable for anybody that's potentially using it. So when we open a data shortcut project with this tool, most of the time, the vast majority of the time that I do this, I'm opening it in read-only mode. And you should too. If you check it out, it's locked. And to do that without communication, the project team who might need it to not be locked would be a problem. For that reason, I tend to advise people to, consider limiting the users who have access to it. And at the time you install ProjectWise over the top of or on a PC over the top of something where Civil 3D is already installed, this is an option in the installation wizard that you can turn off and not install for your users. Honestly, most people don't even know that it's there, so you might just get away kind of with just not talking about it. But the thing you want to avoid is having people open their Civil DS proj files in editable mode where it's going to lock it for everyone else. There really is no problem opening it read-only. It's a great road mapping tool. You should be looking at your data shortcut projects often to make sure that there are no issues being recorded. This thing will track anything that isn't right about them. Let's talk about configuration. So we're going to look at the working directory and the data source setting that needs to go along with it. We're going to look at some of the user property settings that need to be considered. And then I'm just going to talk real briefly on application associations just as a matter of general best practice, but as it pertains to Civil 3D, now it's kind of a continuation there because there's so many different applications that can open a DWG file. It's really important to set the right one. So with regard to working directories, I think that it's a very little known fact that Civil 3D has a preference to file paths that are under 128 characters. Out on, when you're not working with ProjectWise, when you're working out on a network somewhere, typically you're not going to really worry about that because the nature of it generally isn't going to be, the files that you're using aren't going to be buried so deep in a network folder path that they exceed that. But in ProjectWise, what we want to do is consider what that looks like when we start to get really elaborate with that working directory location, because it can get buried in your local app data somewhere and become pretty long in terms of character count. The second thing, in addition to keeping it short, is we don't want it to be unique to every user. We actually want to use a common working directory path. And the reason for that is because when everything is copied down to your local working directory and that data shortcut project is extracted, it actually will put the user's name into it. This is path on my computer to the resources that it pulls down for my session. And if that working directory is specific to me and yours is specific to you, there's some work that needs to be done there to rewrite each of these XML files. If I didn't mention it just now, what you're looking at on the top here, this is a data shortcut. You crack one of these XML files open, and this is a pretty simple one, but this is what you'll see. So what we're trying to do is everything over to this guy right there, we're trying to shorten that up as much as possible before it gets to our DMS folder location. And you can see here that this is the path to the source drawing itself with the name of the data shortcut in it. But down here, we need to go a little bit farther because that data shortcut lives inside of its data shortcut project. When we extract it, and it does get extracted on the local working directory, it has that system folder in it. It's got its short surfaces folder in it. And by the time we get to the end of the 33 characters that Civil 3D adds to that, we're at 174. So from an administrator standpoint, you want to shave off as much of that as you possibly can and leave it up to the people that are using the application to be able to have some flexibility in how they're naming their data shortcuts and their data shortcut projects. And they should be short too. There should be a naming convention there. You should work on that. Keep that 28 character limit in mind. So the 4 things to remember when it comes to the working directory: number 1, keep it short. Have it be data source specific. We've got users working more and more in multiple data sources. Sometimes they're coming from multiple organizations. So, have your data source name be specific, especially if you're hosting more than one, because you don't want to, use the same data source or the same working directory between data sources. You don't need to share the working directory. But more importantly, if I'm working with 2 different organizations and there's just, C PW workdir, that's fairly common, or PW work or something like that, you want to call that out. You definitely don't want your data sources to overlap with another organization, right? So have it be data source specific. Use a common path that is not user specific, and don't provide change permissions right here. Don't check this box or don't tick this box, right? And allow users to change that once you get going. Now that is something where you're bringing in external parties who are working, in that same data or in that same working directory location. Most of the time, that's going to be just fine. Every once in a while, you might have a conversation about that because they may want to use something different. It's always better to have the conversation, admin, rather than just leaving that box open to interpretation, because we really do want everybody on the project to be using the same working directory location. When that happens, you need to make sure that this setting in at your data source level properties is checked. And really, basically, to put it simply, the setting just offers the database some reassurance that you are actually intentionally pathing multiple users' working directories to the same location. To put it bluntly, it kind of makes sure that document locations are also tracked relative to the user, not just PC. As far as configuring each of your Civil 3D users, there's one little group of settings that you need to really consider here, and these are under the document node of each user's account. Leave local copy on check-in and leave local copy on free. I would bet that most, if not all of you, have that first one checked, and probably most of you have the second one not checked. The next 2, whether or not you're using the local copy on checkout and on copy out, that's where people kind of tend to, wake up a little bit and say, wait a second, what's that going to do? So there's a lot of words here, and like I said, you can have the PowerPoint or take a screen cap. I'm going to just sum this up and try to make it simple. First thing people are concerned with is, if I'm not using the local copy, doesn't that defeat Delta file transfer? And no, it doesn't. It actually forces it to use Delta file transfer. Essentially, what you're saying is, regardless of what you find on my local working directory, if it looks like it's up to date in terms of its date timestamp, or if it's more recent than the one on the server, what I want you to do is ignore that fact and use Delta file transfer to determine whether it's different from what's on the server. And if it's different, pull down the changes from the server. I think for anybody working with XREFs, this is probably more consequential than people who aren't, who are just updating information, possibly behind the integration. But when it comes to Civil 3D, we're establishing file relationships through the Data Shortcut project. And anything that's done without ProjectWise integration is done without the knowledge of ProjectWise. So when it gets eventually written back up to the server, there's parts of your Data Shortcut project that aren't going to work the same for the next user who uses them than they do for you if you've worked behind the integration. So we really want to encourage you to not check those last 2 boxes and keep your Data Shortcut projects from being polluted in that way. From a troubleshooting perspective, when we get involved with, trying to figure out why something isn't working as desired in Civil 3D, one of the first things we're going to look at is, how are these 2 settings affecting what could be going on? And those are not turned off chances are that data shortcut project is going to be polluted, and a lot of times the only way to really figure that out or sort it out is to rebuild the whole thing, and that can, nobody wants to go through that. With regard to application association, we're going to break from ProjectWise admin and go over to ProjectWise Explorer for a second and then just look at this. So in your interface, you have this option to associate every single document with a particular application. And with Civil 3D or with Autodesk products in general, that can be kind of consequential, especially if you're contracted to open or to edit files using a particular version of Civil 3D. So it's important to set this the right way. And I think just as a matter of best practice from a ProjectWise admin perspective, this goes well beyond Civil 3D. If you're using open roads, you should set it to open roads. Basically, you want the database to help you out here when you double click on something, or if you're applying a managed workspace, or if you're using ICS for PDF. If the system knows what it's supposed to be using to open an document with, you're automatically in the right place. Then you don't have to worry about somebody opening something with a version that's too new or that they might not have. So for the communication between the people working in ProjectWise Explorer and the admins who are offering up those choices, that's important. You can see here, I'm missing 2019, and frankly, I'm also missing 2021 now. So if I've got documents that are using one of those applications and I'm trying to do the right thing in ProjectWise Explorer and set them all to the right application, this is when I want to contact the ProjectWise admin and say, hey, can you add this application for me so that I can, set my documents? And for those of you on the call who have ProjectWise Administrator, check that. If you're using Civil 3D right now, go and check, make sure that you've got all the various flavors there. And notice that by default, and especially if you're on a mass-hosted ProjectWise deployment here, comes in naturally as ProjectWise integrated AutoCAD, Civil 3D, and then the year. So scroll down to the P's and you'll find it there. All right, so now on to data management. So we're going to talk about data structure, and I'm going to refer to a graphic that Autodesk actually publishes on our knowledge network. We're going to relate that structure to a folder structure. And then we're going to wrap up by talking about how you can really add some custom attributes to your environment that will help admins, they'll help troubleshooting capacity, and just on a day-to-day basis, they'll help users understand what's supposed to happen in which of these files. And sometimes the folder structure isn't maybe going to lend itself naturally to the data structure, and these attributes become even more important in a situation like that. So what does it look like? We talked about level 1, level 2, and level 3 in our opening vocabulary section. And if you go to Autodesk's knowledge network, you'll see something that looks like this, and I'll point out that when you're on that web page, each of these is a link that'll kind of really dive a little deeper into these levels. But basically what we're talking about here is we've got our source drawings, we've got our level 2 consumer drawings. To those consumer drawings, we can overlay some additional line work or some text or maybe images or whatever. And up here, our level 3 drawings will pull in the composite information and wrap a border and a title block around it and become our construction set. The relationship here, the things beside the fact that these are isolated to pay attention to, is that these arrows move in one direction. Anytime you've got an arrow coming back from level 3 into level 1, that's an opportunity to have a circular reference relationship. And sometimes it's level 2 into level 1. There are times when that is relatively safe, depending on what you're referencing back, and it won't be too consequential. And there are times when doing something like that will turn a file that takes 2 or 3 minutes to open into something that you're waiting 20 or more minutes to open. And for those of you who have experienced these long open times, that right there, that circular relationship is probably the thing that you're experiencing. What we do here, what I've done to their chart is added level 0 to it. And the reason I've done it is because our data shortcut project is an object in ProjectWise. It's not just a stack of folders that contain XML files. It's all zipped up and it's one object. And so as such, I want to put it into a place that is unique from where the drawings live. So I've got a parent folder set up for the data, and under that is where my DS project file lives. I've got a parent folder set up for my drawings, and under that I break that down by level 1, level 2, and level 3. And the reason for that, and we've talked about it a little bit, is access control might be different. You might want to apply a different workflow. Maybe the way you version the level 2 and level 3 drawings is slightly different from the way you version your source drawings. Running the reference scanning utility, you want to avoid running that or scanning level 1. You probably definitely want to scan level 2 and level 3. DS folder repair, you want to target that at folders. So when we start looking at that, maybe I want to target a specific discipline to run parent data shortcuts without having to wait for it to chug through hundreds or thousands of the rest of the files. So I break down disciplines at the very end in level 3. Now, if you've got some discipline-specific modeling that goes on, that's fine. You can do that under the subfolders here. And I'm certainly not advocating that your folders look exactly like this. It's just that the structure here is strategic, and it lends itself to the way that we like to isolate the data and also to some of the batch processes that we might like to run on it. But it also provides a lot of transparency. If somebody knows they're working in a level 1 folder or one of its subfolders, then they know that those files are, the source of their data shortcuts. And if they're working in a level 2 file and they decide that they want to data shortcut something out of one of those, then they might, it's really easy to write in your BIM manual. If you're working in a level 2 drawing, don't create that data shortcut. Talk to the project lead about doing it in another file in level 1. So make it work like this. That's the moral here, is not necessarily that it looks like this, but that it works like that for you. So on to custom attributes. What I'm showing you here, I'm going to show you this, how it all comes together in a document list view, but basically in ProjectWise Administrator, I've got a group of attributes that I will build for a particular environment where Civil 3D project work is taking place. I take those and I make a view out of them, and I put them into an interface. And over here in ProjectWise Explorer, I apply that view and I start looking at things in a way that, maybe if I'm searching on all of the DWG files in a particular folder or a whole project full of them, I can start to sort and filter these things based on what type of information they are, what level do they reside on. And when you start seeing duplicates as projects progress, people make their own working copies, it becomes necessary to validate that stuff so that people aren't referencing the wrong information. And so I've got not only the type of file here, but whether or not it's a valid file which should be being referenced, or is it a duplicate? Is it an XREF composite or an overlay? Do you need to figure this out? I've got, for me, here's the workflow, right? I've got what needs to happen here to determine the validity of the document, who needs to do it, and there's a column for what they found along the way. In the middle, I find this to be incredibly useful. What it does is it lists the ProjectWise folder hierarchy of where this document exists. And I've got a little trigger set up so that I just change this value and it updates automatically. Most of us are really kind of conditioned to think about this from a Windows perspective. We use folders and folder structures to kind of tell the story of what kind of a file this is. So as I'm going through and trying to figure out what all of these duplicate files might be, if I see Joe's working folder in the folder path or the file path here, chances are I know kind of what I'm getting into there. So that becomes, this becomes kind of the narrative in that case for a lot of files. And this method has served me well. It's become very valuable, and I can't tell you the number of hours, if not days, it's shaved off of the troubleshooting perspective. Especially if you find yourself, trying to troubleshoot a project or understand a project that you haven't previously been involved with. And for me, that's everything that I work on. So just to kind of show you how to kind of deconstruct this a little bit, I just kind of wanted to put a couple slides together for anybody that's not familiar with setting up custom attributes, or maybe it's been a while. This is a type attribute. So this is, what type of a file is it? What does it look like in the interface? And how did I build that? For our validity, this is how that one came together. Obviously, the drop-down list is something that's your own. And if you don't know how to set up a triggering attribute, this is kind of where you can look for that. And in this case, we're using a system variable to just pull in the folder name and path. So that wraps up the content for today. I do have more information available for you, and we're going to get to some questions here too. Like I said before, I can make this slide deck available for you, a little cleaned up version of it without the animations and stuff, and email that out, or we may be able to set something up where you're able to access that online here. And I'm currently working on a couple new green books too. So the new ones, the first one that'll be out very soon is actually kind of an extension of what we just went through here. It's Civil 3D integration for ProjectWise administrators, and it goes through and kind of lays the stuff out and talks about each point that I make and probably a few more. That'll be up shortly. Following that, I have a new green book coming out for migrating a Civil 3D project to ProjectWise, but implicitly there's a lot of lessons there too. It's really geared toward the user who is very familiar with Civil 3D and really needs to understand how to make this thing work inside of a ProjectWise environment. So rather than just having it be a step-by-step guide, I really tried to be pretty verbose about explaining how and why these steps are important. And hopefully that'll give new ProjectWise Civil 3D users a chance to really understand how the product works. Everything else you see that looks like a hyperlink here is, and it's available in the slide deck. So I am going to open it up for, let me switch over here and kind of take a look at the questions.
Yeah, there's a couple, Dave. I can read them off to you. That helps. First is from Sam Zimmerman. The dref, is that the same thing as an xref?
Yeah, good question. It is not. So an xref is a whole file, right? You're going to xref in a file, another DWG file. A data reference is pulling in just that data shortcut that was established. So we might have one file where we've got 3 or 4 different alignments all drawn out, and each of them is a separate data shortcut. And the dref is the thing that says, well, I want alignment 2 to land in this drawing. So that is different. And the other thing that comes with it is because it's not just the 3-dimensional graphics, but it's data rich, you can start labeling and have some intelligence too. So it the reference inside of the consumer drawing is data rich then.
Okay,
I hope
thanks.
that answered that question.
Next one is from Brandon. Is there a variable for data source name and not full-blown version?
And not a full-blown. A variable for data source name. Do you mean in like when you're setting the working directory folder? Yes, there is. I think it's top of my head. I don't know, but there definitely is. I think it's data source.name, or it might just be data source. Let's see if I can look at. I might have to email you the actual variable name, Brandon. But yeah, there is a variable.
Okay, next
I'm not
one.
sure I understand the second part about the full-blown version part.
That one wasn't clear to me either. And Brandon, if you're still on the line, if you want to do a follow-up question, go ahead. Another one from Maurice. Is the connector for Civil 3D 2022 available?
Not yet. but coming soon from what I understand.
Okay. From Michael, sometimes Autodesk releases significant updates mid-year, i.e. version 2020.1. How does ProjectWise handle that?
So typically the way that this works, and I'll tell you the exception in a second, but typically the way that this works is that this whole thing is built off of the SDK that they release, right? So the agreement is that 2020 uses an SDK and 2020.1 continues to use the same SDK. So when 2020 is compatible with ProjectWise, when it's integrated, we should be good throughout all of the incremental releases of 2020. Now, that being said, 2020.5.2 was no good. That release did break the integration, and that was addressed, I believe, from Autodesk's perspective. But typically, yeah, and I think we tend to wait a little bit. I think we like to wait till the .1 comes out and make sure that everything is locked in from their side of the house. But yeah, as those incremental upgrades are released, it should continue to be just fine.
There's a message from Alan, and it's a bit long, but I'll read it out. Are there likely to be issues with disciplines trying to use data shortcuts where they have read-write access to the data source project, but not necessarily all the source reference files within the project? For example, Geotech wants to reference highway surfaces, but only have access to shared surfaces in highways rather than the live file being used in the DS project.
If the consumer drawing is set up to already reference the data shortcut and you're referencing that consumer drawing, you're good. If you're working in the consumer drawing to access a data shortcut that's coming out of a source drawing that you don't have access to, I think you're going to have problems there. So I tend to tell people, the source drawing should really be read-only to everybody. I think pretty much everything had exceptions, and some of this is how the roles and the access control is established and how well the data is being managed. Certainly, if you've got broken data shortcuts in your level 2 drawings and you don't have access to the source, you're not going to be able to define them. So you can run into some problems there if you don't have at least read-only access.
Okay, and I believe Fred has provided an update there. If you want to take a look at that, relates to the, quote, full-blown version that Brandon was asking about.
Yeah, so the path is going to be relative. It doesn't include the server name. When you look at one of those data shortcuts inside the XML file, it's relative to where you're working. It doesn't start with a full-blown data source, server.bentley or -pw.bentley.com. It doesn't include any of that stuff.
Yeah, Brandon's provided a follow-up data source name variable. I don't know if you see that at the top.
Yeah, there it is. So it does equal the whole. I'll have to look into that a little bit. I tend to not, when I'm setting things up for people, we tend to kind of come up with let's call it a nickname for the data source, we don't use the variable. We're just doing something that identifies it like DEN03 or MM02 or something like that. Because, yeah, that if you're using the variable name and it does put that whole address in it, that's way too long. The whole point is we want to keep it short. And I don't know, I guess then, Fred, if you're still on is there a way to truncate that? Is there a way to just have it be a short name?
John is asking, Civil 3D 2020 requires ProjectWise version 3.4.3 to work properly. 3.4.3 does not allow us to pay for an external account usage. Are there any workarounds for that? I will say that I believe with the 4.0 release, the ability for externals to pay comes back. So this would be a short-term problem, I hope. I don't know of any workaround, but I do know that that ability is coming back in the 4.0 release.
Okay, good. I don't know of any problems with 3.2.9 unless you've run into something, John, where you know specifically that there's some kind of an issue with it. But 3.2.9 seemed to be
anything.
Sorry,
sorry,
ahead, Bill.
No, I was just going to say any 3.434 release is going to be subject to the owner of the integration server paying for all licenses. I don't know. In 2.9.9, that should not be a problem.
Actually, in 3.334, that one should be fine too. I've got a lot of users using Civil 3D 2020 with 334.
I think that is a 3.4 version. Is it not? 3.
Is it?
Yeah. So that's talking about. I think that should be 03.4. I'm not sure.
Would Civil 3D 2021.2 already integrated with ProjectWise 334? There is a module, I believe, for that one. I can check on the compatibility matrix. It does integrate directly with 434, but I believe 2021 required the integration module for all of the versions prior to the 3.4 release. ProjectWise batch print PDF with a drawing containing multiple layouts. I don't know the answer to that. So typically, yeah, if anybody knows batch print, I haven't tried to use batch print with anything here. Now you can use the batch print inside of Autodesk, when you're looking to batch print it and build your session that way. That would be the workflow that I think the users I talk to about batch printing would use. Something that was added relatively recently to that is the ability to select multiple files at once rather than choosing them all individually. I haven't worked with anybody that's using ProjectWise batch print. Chris, yes, Christopher, the presentation, we can get the PowerPoint out to you.
I think that covers it.
I think that does. I don't see any more rolling in.
Okay, well, I want to thank Dave. Thank you for the presentation. Thank everybody for joining. Maybe not a bad idea, Dave, is if anybody thinks of a question after we leave today, since Dave is doing a follow-up next month, perhaps we can lead in, Dave, with, hey, are there any residual questions from part 1?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that would be a good place to start here. We got one other question. Clarify the comment that Civil 3D 2020 requires 3. Yeah, I don't know what the other user was referring to with it. It doesn't work correctly there. I've used Civil 3D 2020. I think I'm using .5.3 probably the longest out of any of the releases, but I've been using that with everything, I think, since 280, really. At least 329. I haven't had any problems with it. So I guess I'd like to know more specifically what the issue was.
And this is only me surmising. And again, to be clear, it's 03.343. Any 03.4x release does not allow for an external to pay for license. That goes away when you go to that release. When ProjectWise 4.0 comes out, that should revert back. So I don't know if there's any cause and effect of where that wouldn't work properly. The only issue that I can think of, and I'm not a Civil 3D guy, the only issue I can think of is it does not allow for that. If I'm working for Acme and I'm an external, I'm logging in, I can't pay for my own usage. It is going to go against the owner of the design integration server. I don't know if that causes an issue for Civil 3D to work properly. I can't speak to that. That's the only issue I can surmise out of that.
Yeah, and I guess the way I read it too, the previous question about it was that I think the user was saying they needed 3.434, I think it was the version, in order for it to work correctly. I would say that there's a chance if you've been using Civil 3D for a while and you've got previous versions of the integration module out there, there's a little cleanup you might need to do on your end in order to, if you're getting fatal errors or something like that. And I will include in this PowerPoint an appendix that will step you through that procedure of just, it'll involve reinstalling ProjectWise after you clean up some of the stuff in the places where it's keeping these modules. But that might be all that you're running into. But I don't know of anything where it doesn't work correctly with the earlier versions.
Okay, and just to follow up to Yelena, if I'm understanding your question correctly, yes, these sessions are recorded and will be available. Anyway, I want to be cognizant of time. We're under a minute to the top of the hour. So again, Dave, thanks for the presentation, and thanks for everyone that joined. And I look forward to talking to you all next month. Until then,
Thank you, everyone.
be well.
If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. If you want to see more such series, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you, and see you next time.